I had an experience a day ago, literally there in this Furality. And it's quite an interesting experience because the lobby just opened up, it's the opening ceremony. And what happens? What happens? I went to a 15-person instance, all right? 15-person. Should be small, right? So I went in. I was alone there. And what do you know? Someone comes in. But you know what happens? I suddenly lag. I was slowing down. I was struggling. And I wonder why. The next thing I know, I was blue screening. I'm sure like some of you had this experience before. Maybe perhaps in a club, suddenly someone with very poor avatar status comes on in and lags everyone out. Or maybe a simple friend hangout. And then someone just happens to have a heavy avatar. Everyone. Right? And goodness.
But that's what public lobbies are for.
There's something we could do about this. I'm kind of disappointed that it just keeps on happening, somehow, public or private. But, you know what? Whatever shall we do? Whatever shall we do? There are ways to mitigate this, luckily. And that is the process that we call optimize. It is the process of making a game run more smoothly and efficiently. This is a keyword, probably something that you heard around the entirety of the gaming industry or video games. Like, what is optimize? What is optimize? And it's simply that. Anyways, to greet you all, my name is Wishdream, returning again. I am a visual experience designer by trade, and for the most part, I've been working on the games industry for around almost a decade now, with 4 AAA games shipped. I'm also a senior multi-role artist, or a generalist. Oh, shoot. Hold on. Let me fix something. There we go. Okay. So, I myself have basically dealt with so many things in the games industry. Probably you may see me work in game assets, character art, environment art, level design, animation, and so much more. And especially the last one, fallback. Fallback meaning I'm the one responsible who's like the emergency person to basically optimize things or making sure that things are running smoothly. You may also have seen me before in my level designs in Sonic World, probably some of my worlds and avatars in Second Life, and as of lately, I've been working in Illuminated VR. I'm also now the main 3D lead designer for Catch the Ferret, working with Ocritus. All right, so today we're talking about making better VRChat avatars. And one of the things that I'm worried about whenever I come on VRChat is that fundamentally, a lot of our avatars is actually really heavy right off the get-go. And what do I mean by that? Well, to be honest with everyone over here, that, you know, usually the standard is like at least 20,000 tries on a single model. But everyone seems to have like more than 30, and that's a problem. And we'll get to that later. But today, I want to show you why we optimize, right? So why do we optimize? Of course, everyone wants to show their own avatars. They don't want to be blocked or hidden. They want to stop lagging people, and of course have a way smoother experience. And if you're like me, I'm worried about everyone else's PC, especially some of my friends who's running like a GTX 1060. And that's like legendary at this point. It is surprising how people kind of disregard that fact. Anyway, so I'm going to teach you right now is to achieve the legendary status of being excellent, good, or medium. We're going to achieve ranking nirvana. So, I'm going to tier this talk in 3 difficulties: everyone, tinkerers, and as well as creators. Everyone meaning everyone who literally don't have any experience on Unity. They just open it up, upload their avatars, and they're good to go. Tinkerers are the ones who actually make textures and make their avatars their own. Like, they change the colors, they change the outfits, they add new things. And creators, God send, you guys are doing God's work for making this community thrive. They are the one who makes the avatars themselves. So I have advice for each and every one of you. And the common theme for this talk is gonna be less is good. Less is good, especially in the VR space. But that doesn't mean we're trapped. That means we have to just put our mindset in a different view. And to make things easier, I'm not going into technicalities. I'm going to opt in for easier to understand analogies, and information will be slightly inaccurate for inconvenience, and sometimes maybe even skipped over. The point of this talk is going to be more practical than actually being like something more technical. And if you want more technical talks, we have 2 other talks actually. We have the one right after this, tips and tricks for asset creation. Avatars count as an asset, by the way. You might want to check on that. As well as for the technicalities for avatar optimization, we have as well as optimization. What you can't see does matter. All right, so easy mode for everyone. This is basically everyone with no knowledge. And here's the thing I'm going to just shoot right off to you guys. Where do I start? All right, I want to start optimizing my avatar. I want to have a lighter avatar for everyone. Well, let's talk about the concept of VRAM. And we're going to think of it, our VRAM, as an inventory space. All right? So VRAM is basically, imagine that your PC has a lot of slots, like inventory space, a limited amount of slots, right? And each of your friend's avatar or anyone else's avatar fill up all of those slots. Now, let's see. What would happen if an incredibly heavy avatar just comes on in, right? Oh God, what will happen to your PC? In fact, let's try and duplicate that to everyone. And everyone has different capacities of inventories because the computers are different, right? Like, you could see, like, the last one's already struggling, and the first one's like, okay, it's pretty okay. But in reality, this is what's happening. The last one already died. The second one, struggling. They're trying to keep on. They're running at like 10 FPS, and you, 30 FPS, perfectly fine, but like, I'm still struggling, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And this is the entirety of the experience. You are over encumbered because someone or someone else, or maybe it might be even you, that basically put everyone down. And you don't want that experience for everyone, especially you, right? You want everyone to have a smooth experience. So how do we avoid this? Well, first of all, when you're making your avatars, be sure to keep it simple. Be reasonable with what you add. And since we all have the ability to upload multiple variants of our own avatars, you can have a basic version. And this line, do you need it all the time, is very important because, like, personally for me, I have a performance version of my avatar and as well as a presentation version of my avatar, like the one you're seeing right now. So be sure that if you're making your avatar, you consider if you want to like have everything on. We always have tools to make things easier. And especially for everyone who's checking this, especially who wants hair, I'm going to call it out now, check the performance, because like hair could be the most lightest or the heaviest thing on avatar. All right, so what can we do? And here's the tools to save you the time. Just for the beginners, this will automate everything I will say from here onward. It's not going to be perfect, but it will help a lot. Let me talk about the golden goose in the room, Polytool. Polytool basically automates the hard optimizations that we are going to talk about later in this entire talk. It's easy to access. You could try in free trial, sadly paid. It's beginner friendly, and results may vary. And look at this, it's a Nardo. It looks practically the same on Quest. That's amazing. The next one, or rather the next two, we got Dark Optimizer. Dark Optimizer is the one that basically automates anything that we have as a medium optimization. Anything that the optimization that the tinkerers can have, right? And VRC Fury is like, literally there is no reason not to add this because it just does everything for you and does the lightest amount of performances, especially the blend shape one. That will tell your PC to like calm down a bit. All right. And I think everyone should be using this, the VRC Avatar Performance Tools. It checks for things that are not tracked by VRChat, and it's a good way to just, in bulk, lower all your textures, images, and optimize it even further. Like I've got, this avatar was originally like 60 megabytes, and I got it down to 15. Right.
Oh, wow.
Okay, but I actually want to know what I'm doing.
Crunch.
Okay, and then safe to say that you pass as a tinkerer. Normal mode, let's customize. So, tinkerers are basically the people who know enough about Unity to tinker. You don't have to like know how to program. You just know how to move things around. You know how components work, and of course, you know an image program. And I'm sure you guys have this experience with me where it takes so long for Unity. Like I think this is like a rite of passage that Unity will take such a long time to open. Okay. Now that we got that started, finally we're in the meat of things. VR limitations. So, VR is very funny because it tends to render 3 times. Even though it looks like it's rendering 1 time, if you consider it, it's rendering to your desktop, the preview window, your left eye, and your right eye. And it's not an exact duplicate either, because like left eye, okay, I'm looking slightly left. Right eye, I'm looking slightly right. Oh, desktop, I'm looking directly at the center. So it renders 3 times. And even more, if you have your camera out, that would be rendering 4 times. And if in reality, it's not running like your PC at all. If in anything, it's running like a PS2. And everything that you see on here is mostly tricks. Like all the realism, it's mostly tricks. Let's talk about the myth of detail, right? And this is one that's gonna be helping a lot of people, especially when they're downsizing textures, is that when it comes to detail, sometimes little details don't really matter that much. Like, look at this. Look at the difference between detail and no detail. If you look at it from far away, it doesn't look that different. Heck, if we go to like one VRChat world, I forgot the name of this already. Look at how the grass is, right? The grass is essentially just a cube. It's a long stretched out cube with a texture slapped on it, right? And that's already passable for being like a clump of bush, right? And we could go even further. As long as you prioritize the focus on detail on the small spots on your avatar, then you'll be fine. This includes the face, probably the hands, the rest of the body. You could just reduce the amount of detail. So yeah, if you consider it, if we are running more like a PS2, the focus on details matters so much more on the smaller spots where you would notice them. So you actually have to like stand away and make sure that you're looking at the right distance. All right, so let's get to the meat and bones of actually optimizing. Now that we settled on that. This is textures. Textures are basically the things, the pickers that make up your avatar, right? Like these are, like all of these are basically your textures. And texture memory is a limited resource. Everyone's GPU has a certain amount of RAM, or VRAM rather. And this is usually VRChat's biggest offender. And trust me on this, you want to make them smaller. You do not need an 8K size texture, and there is a better way to add all of the details. At best, aim for 1K. At most, aim for 2K. You can always go lower, and you will see how ridiculously low I could go without compromising a lot of detail. So this is an example of my Seth avatar. Oh, the left one is a 2048 by 2048 texture. Great. It looks nice. From farther away, I don't think I need that detail if 512 by 512 would serve the same thing, right? Sure, it's a little bit blurry in the corners, but you don't really need something that high. Like, if you could go lower, go lower. And the avatar performance tools I tell a while ago tells you how much detail you could go down. And by the way, I'm going to tell you right now, if you're thinking of doing crunch compression, unless you're really packed for space, don't even use it. Because in reality, whenever we have crunch compression on, whenever it goes to the VRAM, it gets uncompressed, it gets unpacked, and all of its full size is going to go into your GPU. It's not gonna be fun. So if anything, try to avoid it because it's gonna add more CPU or more processing power to for everyone who's going to load your avatar. All right. The general gist of it, you don't have to compromise quality because you could always downsize in Unity, right? So like, please don't import an 8K texture. You will slow down people's PC. Not most people doesn't have that majority, but at least have like a 2K texture and then just go to Unity and downsize that. Like they have this little max size down there and you could just set that down. And yeah, and another common tip is just don't shove your camera in your avatar. Most people will just look at you from a distance. And there is a faster way to downsize all your textures. Guess what? It's 3's avatar performance tools. Hooray! Use it. Please use it. They will tell you every optimization you could do on your texture right off the bat. All right. Now, this might be a little bit controversial. A little bit, all right? You don't need normal maps. If you are a good artist and you could shade, you could fake normals, you could fake shading. A lot of people would just be fooled by not having normal maps. However, if you do have normal maps, at least keep it small. Because in reality of things, that the texture itself is carrying all the details, not the normal maps. You could make it as small as you want. Even though it looks blurry, it will look sharp as long as the regular texture looks sharp, right? And if you're using max, it could be as small as 128. And you'll see what I mean. But if I downsize my textures, it gets fuzzy, right? There is a way, and that's what we're going to do. And it's the magic of, well, I forgot it's in the next slide. But yeah, instead of making a high-res texture that is 8K, we could fake some detail. And it's the magic of masks. Masks. And masks, what are masks? Basically, if black is no, white is yes. And how we could use this magical thing called masks? Well, there are several ways, right? We're going to be talking mostly about Poyomi, by the way, here, but this would apply to 4 other shaders, as long as you know the terms. And luckily, I'll be guiding you through here. But yeah, these are basically the three tabs over here. That's what we're going to be majorly talking about. All right, let's talk about detail maps. You might be wondering, okay, what's detail maps about? Well, detail maps are basically things that you could repeat over a long distance. So for example, like this detail map, the diamond, if you look closely on the clothing, it creates a hatch pattern, right? And that's just a 32 by 32 detail map. And I just scale that, I tell that to like 100 times, and it looks like, oh, my clothing is hatched. It's a 256 by 256 mask, and yeah, that basically adds more detail. And if you notice, we also have a normal map as well that is a 256 by 256. Again, it's not even close to 1K. That's a lot of detail already. Another is stochastic sampling. So stochastic sampling is basically a way to randomize detail. So like, okay, sure, I have one single detail, like maybe like some dirt, for example. And if I turn on stochastic sampling, it looks more random. So if I turn that off, it looks, okay, it's obviously patterned. If I turn it on, oh, hey, it looks random. And you know what else this works for? Fur. This works for fur. If you look closely on the left side, you notice that, oh, it's repeating. It's kind of weird to look at because it's completely symmetrical. And then if you turn it on, oh, it's as random as what fur can be, right? And it's a good amount of detail. And now, what would happen if we add 3 more masks and what we call RGBA masking? Basically the red, green, and blue and alpha channels of a texture, right? And if we combine all of that masks into one, then we could make use of so much more. How versatile can we go with it? Well, especially for clothing or fur patterns, you can make different materials, right? So like all the gold stripes you see on the clothing right there, all of that and more is basically just a mask. Like we have a checker material, we have a holographic material, we have a gold material. They're all in one material. They're all like just cut off. And now I need to mention this. If you want an effect like this where the center is like a gradient, you're going to need some emissions on it, or you want some sparkles on it, use the global masks version of RGBA masks. We have like 4 slots for it, and you'll be able to use that to your advantage. And there's so much more detail you can add. Okay, let's proceed to decals. Decals, you could think of it as a flashlight, right? So flashlights, what does flashlight do? It projects an image onto your avatar. And this is what I mean by having a lot more detail. Because with this amount of detail, you could add non-symmetric details on your avatar, right? So for example, like I have my logo, it's just projected on the top left corner of my shirt, and a huge tattoo like image of a fox, kitsune, behind, right? And look at this. It looks relatively high detail despite being a 128 size texture and a 256 size texture, right? And you know what it feels like when you have this working correctly? Oh my God, I want to show it off like this. Like my first time like watching Yakuza Like a Dragon. It's like whoosh. I get to present all the detail that I want without compromising texture size. And if you want to do all of these, all right, as I mentioned before, we got Poyomi. Poyomi is the one that basically most of us use, and Little Tune is the most known, the most that the Japanese use for their shaders. They have these tools built in, but there's also like ones that are not quite well known. Silent Cell Shader and Mochi Tune also does all the things that I've mentioned a while ago just as well. So take advantage of those. Take advantage of masks, because masks are so much more. You could do so much more with them. All right, so let's talk about material slots, which is another thing that VRChat tends to count. All right. The easy way is just we could use just Dark Optimizer to do everything for us, right? And it's just literally a one-click button. It just does it as you upload. And if you look at the bottom, it just changes all those material slots from like, I can't read it from here, but it's like 12 to down to 8. Like this, my avatar itself would be a very poor avatar if I did not use Dark Optimizer, and now it's a medium. All right. If you really want to go in, use the tool M8 Texture Atlaser. You could basically put all of your textures in one single texture using that way. And then you could just spread it over to the same material to multiple of your meshes. But I'm going to lightly touch the topics after this for BDM. Merging meshes, skinned meshes, is also done automatically by Dark Optimizer. But if you want to go in and actually like, oh, I want to pick specific toggles to turn on and off. So I just want to merge specific things, like say the head, the ears, the body. You could merge that into one. You could use the skin mesh combiner by Explosive Theorem Lab. And of course, much more better, if you're more clever, you don't have to merge. You can merge everything, but you could use also a blank material to not render the thing. Let's say you have clothing on you. If you don't want to render your clothing, you could just use a blank material, or even better yet, you just use all-in-one material and use UV tile discard in Poyomi or Lultune, or even the Furality shader has it too. Okay, so now I'm going to lightly touch on each of these topics. Animators, oh god, animators, they're the black box. They're the black box of everything. Oh gosh, these are basically the things that make your toggles, the things that make your like gimmicks and all of that stuff in your avatar. Let's say you have a sword that's likely being used with an animator. So animators are basically this. These little black boxes added into your components. You should ideally just have one in your entire avatar. I'll explain why. And the layers is that when you go to the animator view, the layers are basically each of these tabs on the left side. And the reason why I said not to use any more animators in your avatar is basically you're doing this to your computer. You're basically ramming an entire truck into your computer. Do not have more than one animator unless you're skilled enough to do some gimmicks yourself and some hacks, but at that point, you might as well be a creator. You only need one, realistically. You only need one for your entire avatar. Okay, how about layers? We can minimize layer count. So imagine this. Every layer is like a car in the road. Let's say your entire animator is just one lane, right? Each car you add is basically going to cause traffic, right? Eventually it's going to cause traffic. The more layers you have, the more tighter the space gets, the more slower it gets, all right? So you want to minimize your amount of layer counts. There's no real number for it, but minimize as much as you can. All right, and again, in 3's avatar performance tools, you could see there that they are counting it as well. And by the way, I know that people would love multiple toggles. Just avoid using any states. There are ways to avoid using any states. Because like if you could exit, it'll go back to enter again, and you just don't need to use any states. So just avoid any states entirely. Every time you see a direction that points out of any state, imagine that processing per frame. Imagine that processing every microsecond, and you do not want that. All right, really quick things to avoid. Unity cloth. Avoid it. It is unoptimized. It is not good for VR. And by any means, just use Fizzbones instead. Gosh. Grab passes. These are basically things that reflect off things. let's say you have a what would be a good demonstration? Okay, so imagine you have glasses, and you have glasses that warp the light around it and the space around it. So what happens if you do that? Well, you're rendering another. You're adding on top of the 3 renderings by adding one more with the grab pass. Don't do that. Physics objects. I know that you guys like want your spring joints and like your little moving little orbs, but it's could be heavy too, depending on how it's processing. So just use visible ones as you can and just mimic the thing. Audio files. Like, I'm pretty sure that no one wants a 20-second intro of an audio file. Like, let's say, like John Cena's entire theme the moment you enter a world. You do not want that, okay? You do not want that. But if you do, just keep it short and make sure that you have load in background on. Constraints. I think VRChat is coming up with a solution nowadays with constraints, but as much as possible, avoid it because they're also calculating every second or every microsecond of VRChat is open, and as well as transparency in general. Just avoid it. However, this is an except. If you use hair or like details, be sure to just use alpha cutout, because like it's the difference between like saying yes or no for every detail in your picture versus just calculating every transparency. Like, oh, it's gonna be, is this half transparent? Is this gonna be full transparent? Is this a quarter transparent? You don't want that. You just want alpha cutout. So just like yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. There you go. And of course, if you are, I know that some of you are guilty of this, your entire avatar is transparent, avoid it. Because you're doing that calculation every second of your entire avatar. All right, and if you are experienced enough, here's a thing to try. You can use Cat's Blender plugin. You could try using decimation on it, and sometimes it gives up good results if you know Blender, of course. All right. Creators, hard mode, bless your soul. You are the bread and butter of this entire community. Thank you so much. I have nothing but huge respect for each one of you, like literally. Hey, knowledge required. You know how to put your models into Unity. You have worked with a 3D modeling program like Blender, Cinema 4D, DAZ, or 3ds Max, and you used a proper material painter like Substance Painter or Blender Uku Paint or Armor Paint or even 3D Coat. It doesn't matter if you're new, right? I'm just saying creators. I'm not saying like long-time creators. It doesn't matter if you're new as long as you understand the concepts. Let's go. First, we need to change the way you think about your approach. Most people will need a reality check on this. Because the best kind of games are done with limitations in mind, right? You know, instead of thinking like, I don't have this available, so I can't create. Instead, what can I create with what I have? Like, look at this, Silent Hill, right? It's running on the PS1. How did they make the atmosphere? Like, they wanted to have a larger world, but instead they hid it behind fog. Here's one, looks like Kid Icarus 3DS. Oh, it looks so nice. It's on the 3DS though. It's not as capable as like an Xbox 360. Not even like a PS2, right? So you gotta work with your limitations. You gotta work on what you can. And in this case, maybe think of VRChat like a PS2. And here's one very big example. Did you know that Okami used to be a very realistic game? A very realistic game. And they can't fit it. You know why? They were working with the constraints of the PS2, right? So what they did, they changed art styles. They changed what it is mechanically. And they just changed it to a painter feel. And now it's like one of the most memorable games in the entire games industry, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, now we could get into the bread and butter for creators. and I'm going to call some of you out. If you are using your sculpts and did not retopo it and send it directly into VRChat, I am going to criticize you from hell and back. That is no reason. Because like I know like people who say like, oh, I'm doing my sculpts in Blender. I have a limited amount of topology. I could turn off dynamic sculpting. That's not a reason. That is not a reason. You still have a high amount of poly count. You need to retopo it either way. All right. So the first thing we could do as creators, and most of us can, I'm looking at people who are like still using avatars of ye old, like Rexes, for example. You can remove unnecessary polys. A lot of it is like, sure, it's curvature. I want to make sure that the detail's right. But in reality, the details are in the textures and the shape. It's not the actual amount of poly count, right? You can focus quads on more important areas like the face and the hands, but not necessarily the arms, the chest, and the legs, you know? And of course, for people, retopo your sculpt, and sometimes retopo it twice, because sometimes you might notice that you can go even lower if you want to really optimize your avatar. You could retopo it twice. And the second round, it goes so much more easier. I could tell you that. Here's an example like Ezio Auditory da Firenze or PS3, that's only 6,000 tries. The entire thing, 6,000. That's gonna be the benchmark we're going on here, okay? Here's an example of my own avatar. It is 3,000 tries. Notice that on the top, it's very high poly. On the lower, it's actually very low poly. But if you look away from it, and if you notice the silhouette, so let me go to silhouette design over here in the cameras. The silhouette matters because this is a high poly. This is a high poly grass, for example, right? This is high poly grass, and we want to avoid this, right? What can you do? Well, you could use two grass textures, right? So two planes with a transparent texture on it. And it makes such a difference because it becomes like, oh, 100 tries to just literally 4, right? And if you notice here, over here at the, at one of our examples over here, I have a high poly sphere over here, a high poly sphere. And oftentimes, if you look at these two from far away, you cannot tell the difference between the two, right? Unless you look really closely, you cannot tell the difference of the two. What is important more is shape and not poly count. I need to reiterate that shape is important, but not poly count. And the mind is very good at filling gaps on this. All right, back to the center for me. And if you are using Blender and you plan to start optimizing, you may want to use the Bridge Edge Loops tool. It basically puts like 2 edge loops together and put it at the center. And that's what I did a lot on my own model over here. Another thing that is a misconception from a lot of people is that they should be afraid of using triangles. Don't be afraid to do so. Triangles are a good way to reduce the amount of tries. It's just that you gotta make sure that it deforms well as well. Like, look at the capeless guy. This could easily be a lot of quads, but no. They just added tries at the end just to make it curve more. And look at the hair. Flat planes are good. It's perfectly fine to have hair that is flat. You know, you don't have to like model every single strand. You could just slap on the hair texture and then put it on the hair. And that would be fine. Another is to optimize your joints and don't rely on subdivision as well. Only make sure you use your shapes. All right, I'm going to speed up a little bit here. We have little amounts of time left. The next thing you could do, at least if you're not changing up your UV maps, is atlasing. Because you don't need multiple texture sets on a single avatar most of the time, right? I want you to remove the bad practice of separating each part of the avatar just for easier usage. Because a newbie is gonna have a hard time. A newbie is gonna be having a hard time making their avatar. Here's the solution: label it. Export your UV maps and then label it. People will understand. That's perfectly fine, especially for people without substance. I personally don't use substance anymore, and it's sort of aggravating that, oh, I need to use substance to texture my own avatar. That's infuriating. Label it. Just label it. Okay, UV mapping. It's basically like unfolding a paper craft, right? That's the entire point of UV mapping, and that's how we put textures on our own avatars. And there's many ways that we could optimize this. For example, the avatar I'm using right now, the Deer Neo, is a perfect good example of this. Focus your UV space, right? So UV spaces, basically like the UV islands you see over there. The detail for that sweater is just the front. I made that sure that it's big. It's just the front because I want people to have their logos or whatever design they have the largest. Everything else is small. And a good example is again the Deer Neo. And look how the paws are so small compared to like everything else, right? That's how you should be doing your UV maps, right? And the texels should be in the power of 2 if you really want some consistent detail between all of them. And this is what I mean by texels. Texels are basically pixels in your textures, but in a 3D space instead. So if you divide it by 2, then it wouldn't look out of place unless like you go really low and really high. So like, ideally you have like a texel size of 1024 and then like all the complementary ones to like 512, for example. Okay, UV mapping. You know, the easiest way to just deal with UV mapping is to just texture pack, right? To just UV map. You could use UV Packmaster 3 to just save every inch of your avatar, or UV Packer if you don't have any money. But UV packing basically is packing everything as efficiently as possible. It's not going to be human readable anymore. It's going to be like the only people who are able to basically texture your model is going to be people with Substance Painter. And you don't want to do that, especially for people that you're spreading your avatars with, right? To save on texture space and to save more, here's a technique that we've used in Final Fantasy XIV. All right, so you could use a technique called mirroring, and basically having a mirror of your mesh UV on the same side. If people really want a version where you could texture differently both sides, then have a different version of it, or at least let them use decals, right? And if you're worried, like I know like people are going to be worried about this, that the normals are going to be flipped when you have your UVs mirrored, then use a different UV. I'll explain more later. And by doing mirroring, you could have the texture size for more detail. Another one that is used in Half-Life called trim sheets. And basically you put all the textures and all the parts you have, and then you adjust all your UVs in a quick but effective way. Like if you see on me right now, the chains, the diamond and the feathers are just trim sheets. So you could use that for a lot of detail with a short amount of time without wasting too much time as well. And here, I want to see more of these. Okay, use different UV mapping for different purposes, right? Sure, your details could go on UV0, right? Like if you could see on Blender, I have like 3 UV maps there. On UV0, I have your regular UV map. This is where people would texture their stuff. UV1 is your normal map, so it wouldn't have normals that would look off. And UV2, I could use that as a direction map for my details. So like if I have seams on my shirt, I could use that to point it to another direction. And you have 4 slots, there's no reason. Okay, number of bones. Funny thing, tails could be as short as 4 bones. You don't need 16 bones for tails unless you really have a long tail or really smooth movement. Because here's the thing, you could just smooth out the weight paints. Like you don't even need to know weight painting. You just like go to auto weight paint the tail, right? And then just use the smooth weights. That's it. Like I've seen this done in like 3ds Max and as well as Blender. It's not an excuse to just have more bones for more detail, unless you really need it. Animators, I'm gonna lightly touch upon this. It's worth learning about blend trees. Go to vrc.school about that, and as well as just reduce your animation states in general, and research right defaults on and off. Because as much as people say, oh, keep your right defaults on because it reverted back to normal, there's an advantage of making a toggle with right defaults off because it keeps the animation there without changing it back. All right, other things. I think most of VRChat SDK recommends this, like the auto fix button now, but like load in background for audio, use and learn Unity stats. My talk is not for this. It's gonna be for something else. Maybe on the next talk or the more detailed technical talk for avatars, as well as make sure that you have your read and write mesh on, legacy blend shapes on, and check your Unity profiler as well. And if you can, learn more about draws. One thing I didn't mention, an optimization method here is also vertex colors, but sadly I didn't have the time to put it on my slides. Anyways, now that we're ending here, just a reminder that less is good, but doesn't mean that we're trapped. We could do so much more within our limitations because our creativity would sparkle with limitations. And of course, if you want to learn more, please check out tips and tricks for asset creation for games and VRC, which is after this one, and as well as optimization. What you can't see does matter as well. Thank you so much. I don't know if you have time for Q&A, but if you guys have questions, please check out the Discord. I'll be answering over there, as well as yeah, we have time. We have time.
Yep, we have time for one single question I will give you. So I will give one from, let's say, one from Bardic Arche. What is the solution for transparency rendering for eyes and glasses?
The solution for rendering eyes and glasses, there's 2, right? One, you let the material be transparent as a separate material. The transparency must be a separate material. Otherwise, you'll just render the entire thing. Second, you could use dithering. Dithering is a technique where basically only like a set pattern is actually blank instead of like completely transparent. So it gives the illusion of transparency. Here you go.
There you go. Awesome. Thank you so much, Wishdream.
I want to just thank to all my friends and as well as the other presenters over here that are just helping me, as well as like I couldn't get into much detail. As you could see, it's a very dense talk, and I'm so appreciative that they are tackling the things that I can't tackle over here. Thank you so much for listening to my talk, and I'll be jumping around to the same to audience instances of this if you have more questions. All right, thank you.
Expensive class.